We're we're gonna we're gonna start today talking about the first or the next project here, and this project will be somewhat of a kind of a culmination of all of the things that we've been talking about and working on, with a shift of sort of focus of attention. You're going to be asked to incorporate all of the different concepts and ideas and strategies and things like this into the series of photos that you're going to make. Except in this case, we're going to be looking at not objects, but we're going to be looking at things other than objects. There's this concept called no-tan, and some of you may have heard of it before, some of you maybe not. No-tan literally means light dark, and it's a philosophy, it's a concept, and what it means is to give utility to empty space. It's to recognize that that emptiness is just as important as fullness, that the utility of things in a lot of ways is in its emptiness. It's in its blankness, kind of thing. And so when we think about that in connection to our compositions, what we're talking about is figure ground, or positive and negative space. I like to use figure ground only because positive negative space has a sort of a strange connotation. You know, when we think about negative space, we're thinking negative, right? Like it's a bad thing in some way, as opposed to positive space, which is not. Particularly when we are looking at photography, it's usually very object-based. We see an object, we see a subject, and then we point the camera at it with the objective of rendering it, of capturing the image and showing it to an audience. But what if instead we were interested in the spaces between objects? Instead of capturing the tree, what if we were capturing the spaces between the trees? And that was in fact where our attention was. That's the concept of no-tan. It's appreciating not only the trees, of course those are beautiful, but also the spaces in between the trees, which is really where the utility is, because the space between the trees, that's the space in which we can lay and get relief from the heat. So I had this little box. I just realized I had this box next to me on my desk. The whole idea of no-tan is you have an object like this, you have a box, but the whole purpose of the existence of this box isn't the outside, it's this. This is the reason this exists, is for this, the negative space that it has. And so with that concept in mind, we want to move forward with this next project, which is a figure ground project, which is giving utility to the negative space that we use. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share. That way we can definitely see things very well. Here we go. Boom. You guys should be seeing just a full screen there. Figure ground, giving utility to the negative space. Somebody give me just a quick thumbs up that you're seeing that.
We could see it.
You could see it? Great, thank you. So really, I mean, there are a variety of strategies to approaching this, but it's because we're not really talking about any kind of design strategy. What we're really talking about is where your attention is. This project is going to be a lot more about incorporating and folding in all of the strategies that we've been using together, but then focusing our attention on the spaces in between, the things that are not what we're looking at. Things like, for instance, shadows. I had mentioned this in the last critique we were having about how important shadows are in photography. Shadows being the absence of light or the presence of light. You cannot have a shadow without light. Light is what creates a shadow. If you have no light, then you have no shadows. A shadow is the sort of indication of something that is blocking the light. It is oftentimes an indication of something that you don't see as a photographer. I mean, as the viewer, and as a photographer, you're presenting outside of your frame. We talk about the idea that photography is a negative or a subtractive medium. I've mentioned that many times, and it's no more important than now. It's very important to consider that now, because photography if it's the process of reduction until there's just nothing left, except the essential parts that you want to communicate. Really what you're looking for, what you're aiming for, is this balance between the figure and the ground. What is an object and what is not the object, the spaces in between all of those objects. That is truly what is going to create the movement and the energy that you are ultimately looking for. It's going to create depth. It's going to create complexity within your composition. And the viewer will just simply see it as complete. It will just look and feel intentional, your compositions, rather than arbitrary. Shadows can be the subject of your photographs. They can be what your image is about. And the use of shadows only just adds to that. Patterns. We've been working with repetition of items in order to create rhythm. We've used a variety of different rhythms. I had mentioned a little bit that there are other types of rhythms than the three that we looked at: the alternating rhythm, progressive rhythm, undulating rhythm. There are different other types of rhythms as well. There's also different types of emphasis. There's radial emphasis, and so on. When you start to use pattern, you are in fact beginning to create or suggest a rhythm. Anytime you create a pattern of repeating elements, you're going to be suggesting a rhythm, whether that's in audio or visual. It's the human nature to try to put those together in a way. An image like this, which is the way that it's photographed, is very much about the negative space and the positive space. It's a pure interaction between those. But what it's creating is something we call a dissonant rhythm. There's definitely a repetition that's happening here, and it's certainly establishing somewhat of a rhythm. But that rhythm is unpredictable. It's not regular, and it's not something that you can identify as where the next logical element would go within that rhythm. And so this would be a dissonant rhythm. It's very similar to like looking up at the stars and trying to identify where the next logical star might appear. So dissonant rhythm is definitely something that it is a thing, but it is definitely hard to control. This is also, of course, taking advantage of diagonals. We have a tremendous amount of angles and counter angles going on here. And so using pattern in combination with dissonant rhythm, in combination with the reduction of the subject into essential positive and negative space, is yet another way to create this kind of rhythm, movement, and ultimately expression within our compositions, because that's what we're trying to do. when you first are learning a language, you're learning the grammar, you're learning the structure. And what's frustrating, particularly with when you're learning how to speak a language, is being able to express yourself fully with the language, to be able to express things, first of all, express things that are very simple, like happiness and anger and pain and things like that. But what about things like, sarcasm and, the nuances of humor and stuff like that with language, with verbal language in another language? You have to understand the language fairly well in order to be able to do that. And you also have to know when it's appropriate and when it won't work. It's the same thing with visual language. We study the grammar, we study the various structures in order to be able to use it in a variety of ways, depending on what we're trying to communicate. Those of you that have been in a couple of my classes or in other classes where you're more in tune with your cameras, maybe camera control and those types of things. I'm seeing it in some of your photographs already. So I know that a number of you have a knowledge about this, even though that this class, as you guys know very well now, it's not about the camera. It's really just about the compositions. But what we have here is something, we can identify as focus. Focus meaning sharpness or non-sharpness, for that matter. Depth of field, this is a term we use to describe the depth of our focus within a photograph. It's also, human beings have depth of field. There's a really kind of a cool experiment that anyone can do by poking a pinhole with a needle through an index card. And what you do is you place your finger over, in front of you with one eye closed, and you move your finger out to the point where it is in focus, where your finger is in focus. And what you'll notice, if you keep your eye trained on the finger, yet notice everything else in the background, the background is out of focus because your eye is trained on something that's very close to you. And so your eye is actually, the critical focus is very close to you. However, when you put you keep your eye focused on your finger, you put the card over your eye with the pinhole, and you're looking through this tiny, tiny aperture, this small little pinhole, something remarkable happens. All of a sudden, your finger, which you may be just inches away from your face, and everything else in the background come into focus. I mean, in focus, not a little bit, but a lot. You will see this dramatically. What will also happen is everything will get a little bit darker. Why? Because, of course, there's less light that can pass through that tiny pinhole. So there's a sacrifice. You need more brightness to be able to do that. But what you gain is what's called depth of field. And the reason this is happening is because the light has to be much more focused to get through that tiny pinhole, a lot less scattered, a lot less disorganized. It's the disorganized light, the unfocused light, that gives us that sort of softness. It also gives us this fall off. You see, when we look at a thing, or when a camera looks at a thing, and we focus, or we allow the camera to focus, it focuses on a very thin plane, very thin plane. The critical focus of a camera is just a sliver in terms of depth. So you focus on this thing. Everything else that appears to be in focus falls from there. So if this cup is the thing that's in focus, and I'm focused here, everything else beyond that, for this is in focus, everything beyond that past this way, going in this direction, would be an illusion of in focus. And everything from here forward would be an illusion in focus. That is, if the camera is here. So we focus the camera here, and everything forward is an illusion, and everything backward of that is an illusion. And the illusion is being created by this thing called depth of field. And we control that by using the aperture. The bigger the aperture, the more quickly that illusion falls away. And the smaller the aperture, just like when we put that card over our eye, the more gradually that illusion falls off. And so if we make the illusion fall off very gradually, you can see very gradually, if it starts falling off that way, I can get the entire cup in focus plus what's ever back here and whatever's in front. However, if I manipulate the camera and make the aperture very wide, allowing all kinds of scattered light to go through, the aperture is going to fall off very quickly, the focus, depth of field. So I'm still focused on here, but it's going to fall off so quickly, it's going to go like that. So the focus from here will fall off. By the time it gets here, everything's completely out of focus. Even so, by the time it gets to the back of the cup, the focus may be falling off so quickly by the time it gets to here, the back of the cup is out of focus. And so what you get is a very thin plane that appears to be in focus and then softness around the rest of it. That's what you're seeing in this example of an image, is this leaf that's in focus. Everything forward of it is blurry. Everything behind it is blurry. It's because they are using a very wide aperture and the depth of field is falling off very quickly. This can create this positive and negative, can accentuate the positive and negative shape. You can see, you can take something that would be highly textured and very complex, and it sort of reduces it down into shape, almost exclusively into shape. In fact, there's nothing that says that a photograph has to be in focus. There's no rule that says a photograph has to be all in focus, as long as it is intentional. If you are able to make a photograph that is soft, that is blurry, but it is intentional, meaning that when the viewer looks at it, there's still an order to it. It still makes sense. It feels as if there's a reason for it to be as it is. Just like looking at an abstract drawing or painting, the audience will accept it. If it doesn't look intentional and if there is no structure, then the audience will just see it as a mistake, just like they would, if they happened across a splash of paint on the wall. They're not looking at it in the context of it being intentional. They're looking at it as a mistake. So focus can be an incredible tool to use to isolate and to be able to use the positive and negative space and highlight the spaces in between objects rather than simply just the objects themselves. We also use line, clearly. Line is most useful to us when we're allowing it to dissect and cut up the space. We were noticing, and I highlighted a little bit last class about the strength of the compositions, the strength of the images, where you guys, the photographers who we were seeing, where they were allowing the entire picture plane to be addressed. In an image like this, where we have the stairs that are going from one end of the composition to the other, we have the pavilion roof up there that is running off the top, it's going off over to the side, and then it is almost completely taking up the upper third of the composition. Then you have these triangles that are all being created by that cutting up of the space. The triangle in the upper right that's being created, the triangle in the middle that is then being broken up by the figure in the middle, the triangles of the bicycle that are repeating. All of that is creating this interaction between the positive and negative space, where we're no longer just isolating on the objects. We're made aware of the interaction and the energy of the positive and the negative space. This works as well with shape. When we are taking advantage of the entire picture plane, in other words, the frame. Remember, photography reductive, meaning we remove things until we no longer can remove things. So if what I am focusing on is the gesture of a certain person, then that is what I want to present. And so I want to continue to reduce, and I want to continue to explore until I get to just what I want to explain, or just what I want to express. if I was writing a sentence, I would not want extra words in that sentence if I don't need them. I would continue to edit and I would continue to refine. I would look for other words, perhaps more simple words, perhaps more appropriate words to reduce down what I'm saying so that it is very clear and so that it sounds good when I read it out loud and all of those things. The same thing with visuals. You're reducing things down. You are looking at how it interacts between the highlights and the shadows. You're also looking at the interaction between what is an object and what is not an object. Am I creating what we would call active negative space, active a ground space? So with this, with the gesture as it is, you have the chin that's looking up, you have the elongation of the neck, and then the subtle suggestion of a shoulder. But what that's doing is it's carving out a secondary space. It's carving out that space to the right. Now, this exposure is such that we're giving texture to the neck. If this exposure was a little bit different, meaning if the picture was taken with a slightly different settings on the camera and the skin texture was dissolved a little bit more, so we weren't quite aware of as much skin texture, this would start to become almost a purely formal, geometric kind of shape-based abstract image. And we would become even more aware of that shape on the right. But nonetheless, what that shape on the right is doing, because we created a closed shape over there, it is helping to balance out what otherwise might be a lopsided image with all the energy on one side. But it isn't. We are able to balance that off because we're using the entire picture plane. That's very important when we're trying to activate the entire plane, when we're trying to give balance to positive and negative space. You guys can take advantage of color. Some of you are working in black and white. Color can be a very good strategy for creating tension and creating energy as well. So this is just another example of reducing an image down to the most essential, simple elements. Notice that the figure, the guy, where he is placed, you can all say it in unison. He's placed on one of the rule of thirds power lines, vertical and horizontal. You want to notice also that the diagonal is not going from corner to corner. It's been pacified off to the side there. He's got a red vest on, not the exact red as the background, but it is harmonious and it is analogous to the other shades and tones. Many of us have waited and waited and waited for the right person with the right jacket on to get just the right photograph in scenes like this. I don't know if this photographer set it up so that he said, hey, dude, you with the red vest, go down this escalator for me or stairs. However, these kinds of things can happen. And sometimes you put yourself in the position for them to happen. You notice, hey, there's people with red vests on. What if I set myself up in a place where they're going to be crossing and I can get this really interesting interaction between them? More on that in a moment in terms of what that's called. Atmospheric space, atmospheric depth. The idea of using of the atmosphere, basically the weather, the type of lighting that is out there. Days where it's bright, days like this where the sun is out and shining in such a way, it's going to create some magnificent shadows. It's going to create some beautiful interactions between the highlights and the depths of the shadows, and you're going to get some textures that come out. But on days where it's just completely overcast, where it's completely soft, those aren't lost days. Those are not days in which we cannot photograph. They may not be your favorite days for people that enjoy golden hour and they enjoy the harsh and dramatic shadows, but there are ways in which we can use this kind of lighting to create the kind of almost dreamlike fantasy worlds in a way. And what we do is we focus more on the interaction between positive and negative space, because we don't have the dramatic lighting to activate the space. We don't have those hard shadows to move our eye around the space. We're almost exclusively relying on shape and positive and negative interactions. And so here, instead of dealing with shadows and directional light, what we have are a repetition of shape. We have a tonal variations between the lights and the darks. And then we, of course, have it broken up by the single figure within the scene. Would this be balanced without that figure in the scene? The answer is no. If that figure was not in the scene, if you close your eye and put your finger over the figure and kind of get rid of them, you'll see that the composition starts to lean very heavily on the left, because it's dark and it's running off the edge. There's just way too much weight there. The figure is absolutely necessary in this composition to balance it out, because it breaks up that negative space just enough to be able to create that counterpoint. Of course, the repetition, as we mentioned, creating alternating rhythms. When you create this kind of formality, when you break down the space in this way, you are in fact calling attention to the negative space, the spaces in between, just as much as the objects. The spaces in between each of those trees, the spaces and the emptiness in between each of those power lines, that really is the emphasis of the image like this. And so if you understand that when you are pointing your camera at things like this, that's actually what you're making an image of. You're not making an image of the power lines. You're making an image of the spaces between the power lines. So you would use that, understand that, and orchestrate your composition with that kind of knowledge. Rhythm, of course, progressive rhythms. Being able to keep balance at the same time, that's going to be an important factor. A decisive moment. Now, this is where I was alluding to before, where we can anticipate when things are going to happen and then wait for it to happen. So if we are in a space, particularly a public space like campus or downtown or wherever, and we know there's a location that we're very interested in that would be ideal for this kind of project, where we're looking for an interaction of shape, where there's emptiness and texture, or there's this sort of shape-based positive negative interaction, but it needs, for instance, a figure, or it needs some other kind of element to happen. You have a couple of choices. You can either manufacture it, orchestrate it, choreograph it, and get somebody to do it for you, or you can put yourself in a position where you know it's naturally going to happen and simply make it, take the photograph when it does. That's called a decisive moment. And that's a term that we use to talk about something when it is just about to happen, the moment before it happens. Waiting just for the right moment for this person who happens to have the white hat with the black tie around it, for them to be walking down the stairs with their arm on the right rail, and then waiting and waiting and waiting till they get to that step to make the image, because that's where the interaction is going to be best captured. Not the step up and not 3 steps down onto the landing, but right there. That is called the decisive moment. And that takes something called pre-visualization, where we're thinking about what we want to make before we make it. And then we're just simply waiting for it to happen. And when it does, it's remarkable. It's like magic. These are all strategies. Let's see, someone, sorry for being late. Oh, okay. It's okay, Zoe. So these are all examples of strategies for approaching this idea of using positive and negative space in a balanced and constructive way. As you can tell, I am not talking about a structure the way we've been talking about structures before. We're not talking about positive negative space as a structure. We're talking about it as a way to a different way of focusing, meaning what your attention is on. It's not on the objects, it's on the spaces between the objects. So all of these are strategies for getting there, not necessarily a structure for making it happen. So here are some student examples from years gone by. As I mentioned, there's no reason that a photograph has to necessarily be completely in focus. There can be this sort of abstraction that happens. I mean, just looking at this, there's no, I mean, you would see this as an image. It looks very intentional. There is some clear hard lines to it. It doesn't look completely soft, but it's certainly not in focus. And besides that, the composition in terms of the arrangement of the space and the shapes that are being created are positioned in a way that look and feel remarkably intentional, as if the photographer meant for them to be exactly where they are. So when I said a photograph doesn't necessarily have to be in focus, if you were wondering what is he even talking about, this is an example of what I'm talking about. Another example of essentially getting in closer. We're all the way back to the emphasis project now, right? We're getting in closer and closer and closer to objects. The idea that we're going to start from a distance and slowly move in a point of view to be able to break down a space to make it not what the object is, but the interaction between the space and the object is what we're aiming for. It's a cat. Again, we're talking about exposure. Those of you that have been in my lighting class will remember our You Know Better portion of one of our projects. And this is where you were invited to really experiment and explore with non-traditional exposures. In other words, making photographs that wouldn't necessarily be considered correct, very bright or very dark, but intentional, looking as if they were deliberate. And it's tricky. It's not. It needs to be approached very carefully, and it can get out of hand very quickly. But an image like this, where we're breaking it down into some basic shapes, and we allow that flower to become a complete positive or negative space, however you would want to look at it, is certainly a way to explore and a way to investigate creating this kind of a balance, particularly if you were working with an illustrator, a designer, who might need an empty space like this, and you are able to provide it for them within a photograph. You would deliberately want to make images just like this, with probably even more empty space like that, so that the graphic designer might have very clean room to be able to add text or body copy or whatever else they might need to do. And then you wouldn't have to worry about them cropping or otherwise distorting your image. Repetition, the use of shadows. You know, all of these things are simply strategies, not structures. So you might notice that we're using all of the different ways in which we can compose in this project. This is really more about combining all of the things that we have been learning, so that we can get to this way of seeing. We're kind of coming back full circle into a point of view again, from the beginning, through all of the various line strategies and rhythm strategies and the rule of thirds. We're moving through those very quickly so that we can then combine them into this exploration of figure ground. So what are we going to be doing with it? Hopefully you guys did receive the Blackboard message, but I did I did put up the handout. Let's say, there we are. I did include the handout here. And so it's basically the structure, basically the pattern that we did for the last project, for the lines project, where we will be having you look for successful models that are not your own photographs, We're looking for you to locate other images. This is mining the internet, mining what is now our library, which is the internet. I would just ask, don't type in keywords, notan or positive negative space. Think about what kind of images would be this way, and then look for those kinds of images and identify the interactions yourself. These kinds of researches, again, and I've said this before, this is not about asking Google for the answer. This is about you thinking about and exploring and discovering an answer within all of the research. When you ask for the answer, you're going to be given someone's version of it. In some cases, that's valid. If it is a mathematical equation or a scientific formula that there is no debate about, an answer is satisfactory. When we're talking about ways of seeing, we're talking about vision, we're talking about the way you communicate. There isn't an answer that you're looking for. What you're looking for is examples. You're looking for your own solution. When you ask, how do you do it, right? Plenty of you guys would say to me, you'd be looking right at me and you'd say, Alexander, how do you do this? And in the most non-snarky way, I would say, well, I can tell you how I would do it, is if that's what you're asking, but I'm mostly interested in how you would do it. And so that is what you're looking for when you do these research sort of exercises, is you're looking for examples that are not already identified. You're looking for examples that are sort of what you're identifying, not what somebody else has identified as a successful model. Does that make sense? That's why I'm having you not look for keywords like that. It's because I don't want somebody else's idea of what notan is, because you type in notan into the search, you're going to get somebody else's solution. Somebody else said this is notan, not you. You're just taking it and saying, hey, somebody else said this is notan. I want you to go out and discover what it is and then show me and show everybody else. So you're researching on and finding 5 images and you're posting them like we did before. And then we're going to meet together like this on Zoom once again on the 28th, on Monday. You should have those 5 images already posted, called name _ neg research. So that's a posting. Your name, negative research. Monday we'll meet just like this, and we will go through them as we did before, talking about them and so on. Also, very important. Oh my God, very important. We're gonna introduce our last project on Monday as well. I'm going to be talking about our last project. I'm going to be introducing the last project. You're going to hear about it and you're going to get the instructions for it to start working on it. And so everyone will need to be participating in that one. So then, just as we did before, then you will begin your process. You'll begin shooting images on that following Wednesday, which is already March 2nd. You'll post your 5 images of your own. These will be your examples of your own images. And then we'll get the feedback just as we did before. This time the posting is a new posting called name _ notan. Some of you made a mistake there. You kept posting to your lines research posting. And some of you corrected that, but you make a new posting after the research part, brand new posting, name _ notan this time. And then we'll do as we did before. You're going to jump on there and we're going to give feedback and so on. And then after that, you'll continue shooting. You'll apply the feedback and you'll add to your original notan posting. So pretty much everybody got that concept. So I think it came across. There was only maybe 2 people that had some questions on maybe how to add to postings. And I'll be glad to clarify that for anybody else. So basically what you're going to be doing is return to the areas that you use for the initial. You don't have to keep going and wandering all over the place. In fact, exploring a small place thoroughly is usually better. So you'll return to that place, you'll continue making images, you'll be thinking about some of the things that you saw, some of the other solutions. That's the point of sharing early and reviewing. It's not just to get feedback on you, it's also to discover some ideas maybe you hadn't thought about. You can shoot, you'll be shooting dozens and dozens of images. Just because you want to wind up with 15 in the end doesn't mean you're going to take 15 or 20 or even just 30. You're going to take dozens and dozens of images to get to the point where it's going to be enough. Now, here's another thing. Look at your work. If 2 images are the same image, they don't go in the same posting. If 2 images are you moving 2 steps from where you are, you take a picture, you take 2 steps to the left and take another picture, those aren't 2 pictures. Those aren't 2 pictures. That's one picture. Those don't belong together in the same posting. I would much rather you instead look at both of those images. Sure, you're going to make those subtle changes. I definitely encourage you to do that while you're shooting. But when you're choosing which ones to post, look at them and decide which one, because both of them don't belong in the same one. It's like repeating a word in the same sentence. It's, like I ran. You wouldn't do that, right? You use the word ran twice in the same sentence over. It's like a stutter. You wouldn't want to do that. So we don't want to do that. So some of you guys have fallen into that by mistake or for whatever reason. So make sure that your images are unique from each other. So you want to have images that are fully exploring a space. In some cases, it does appear on some of your postings that you took a one turn around around a building. In other words, you started taking pictures and you took about 5 pictures moving about 12 feet from here over to here. And that's what you have posted. While that can be an interesting experiment to try to do, that's not what we're trying to accomplish in this course. What we're trying to accomplish is an exploration of spaces. So you definitely want to be moving about the space, shoot under a variety of lighting conditions. I've said that many times, but you'll definitely want to do that. Those with camera experience, controlling your depth of field again is important. I would also encourage you to do that out of the ordinary exposure solutions if you're comfortable with it. Recall the you know better exercise that we did from 276 if you took that course. We're talking about that, the idea that you can make adjustments and make exposures that are different and non-traditional and still have them work. So in the end there, you're gonna select 10 more images. You could have, you can take the first initial ones down, so it doesn't have to be just 10, but you're gonna add at least 10 more. And then your total will be 15 images in the end. So whatever you do with those first 5 that you posted early, those could stay, those 2 of them could stay, all of them could come down and you replace all of them, that's all fine. You could put 15 brand new pictures up, or leave all 5 and just add 10 more if you're super happy with them, that's cool too. But that's the process. It's a duplicate process-wise from the lines. So if you work through the lines and it worked well, and you did that well, then it's the same process. If you work through the lines and it was confusing, but you learned it, you're like, oh, now I know what we were supposed to do. This is a repeat of that. So that's how we're gonna move forward. We will have a face-to-face on that 7th there when we do the review for these images. It will also be a kind of preempt for our last meeting. Believe it or not, it's all going to be week 8 by that time, which is the 9th of March, which will be when we look at and review your final project. So you're going to be working on this experiment, but you'll also be working on your final project, which will be a very personal project. I'll give you parameters and outline, but you'll be making a lot of choices on your own about the focus and nature of what you're going to be doing. Just as a little bit of a teaser, it's going to be thematically around the self-portrait. Don't panic, it doesn't have to be of your face. But it will be thematically around the concept of the self-portrait. So that's why I say it's much more personal than the other projects. So that's how things are going to look. Are there any questions?